I know you all came out tonight, or stayed in tonight, to hear about people getting hanged and pressed to death and ergot poisoning, and we will get to all of that stuff, I promise you. But there is some other stuff that we need to go over first, more prosaic stuff that we need to kind of get in place because really the table was set for the Salem witch trials years before the first accusations were even hurled. So Salem is a Puritan settlement, settled by Puritans in the 1620s, 1626 specifically. And Puritans are part of the Church of England. They're a religious movement in the Church of England. But they feel that the Church of England has become too decadent, too corrupt, too Catholic, and they want to purify the church. And that's why they're called Puritans. And their approach to purifying the church is to come over here and start over. They will come to the New World, they'll start over, they'll set up that city on a hill, they'll get it right. They'll set up a colony run according to strict Puritan principles, and then corrupt old Europe will see what's going on in the New World, and corrupt old Europe will kind of get their acts together. So they're reformers who kind of want to lead the way by coming over here and doing it right. And when they arrive here, they're starting over. This is the edge of the world. So when they first arrive here, there's nothing, asterisk, here. You want to live somewhere? Great. Build yourself a house. They're really roughing it. You want to go somewhere? Well, there are no roads. You have to figure out where you're going. This is starting over. This is the edge of the world. So it's not an easy life for a good long while. Puritans have this very binary way of thinking, as far as I can tell. They're intensely religious people, and they see God everywhere. If you see God everywhere, you also are going to see the devil everywhere, because if God likes you, the devil is also out there, and the devil hates you. If God is smiling on you because you're doing well, then the devil is there trying to kind of trip you up. The Puritans get very into this kind of way of thinking. So when they arrive here, they see these dark forests spreading out, and they don't know who's out there, and they start thinking that the devil was maybe lurking somewhere out in the woods, waiting for them. Now, I said that there was nothing here, and I put up a little asterisk. Well, of course there's something here. When they get here, there are native tribes living here, been living here for thousands of years. I often say that when the Puritans first arrive over here, it's kind of like going to Mars as far as they're concerned. It's this whole new place they've never seen anything like before. And if coming here is going to Mars, then meeting the native tribes is like meeting the Martians. The Puritan settlers had never seen people like this before. John McNiff pointed out to me a while back that your average Puritan settler is a fairly short person. I'm 5'8". I would have been maybe a little bit on the tall side for a Puritan. Your average native, they tend to be very tall people. They tend to be well over 6 feet. So not only are they kind of strange and unlike anybody else you've seen, they're freaking huge. So they're incredibly intimidating. And you have no idea who they are and how their culture works. So it's natural to be kind of cautious and even afraid of people when you're trying to understand who they are in this kind of situation. Because of that sort of Puritan mindset, these people are not Christians. If they're not Christians, they have to be of the devil. So there's a lot of fear about the devil and about these native servants of his being out there in the woods, just beyond your settlement. So that's kind of leads to some tension. One of the other problems that happens is after a few decades here, changes in the royal government back in England. England sneezes, the colonies catch cold. There are some shakeups in England that lead to Salem getting its charter revoked, the royal permit for people to be here. They lose the charter, which means that they're kind of illegal now. We're not really sure what the legal status of the colony is anymore. So not only do you have these Satan out there in the woods with these strange servants he might have, but now suddenly the whole colony is on questionable legal ground. So there's a lot of weirdness and a lot of tension in the air here in Salem. And this all kind of, I think, feeds into the witch trial. A lot of uncertainty, a lot of weirdness, and probably just neurosis in the population. Now, Salem back then was much larger than it is today. I live in Salem right now, the city of Salem. And the city of Salem today is roughly the size, or roughly the same boundaries as Salem town back then. You also had, in addition to Salem town, you also had an area called Salem Village, which is more rural. You also had another section called Salem Farms, which was also quite rural. And these are all several miles inland, away from the shore, away from the prosperous Salem town. Now, Salem Village is an area that, because it's a village, it is dependent on Salem town for services. It's kind of, it's part of it's not a fully autonomous unit just yet. They want to be, though. They want their independence. There are some differences the people who live in the town versus the village. A friend of mine lives in California, lives in Northern California, and he says the people in Northern California and Southern California feel that the state should be split into two groups, because he says the populations of North and South California are far too different, and you shouldn't expect them to live together. I think that's very similar to what's going on between Salem Village and Salem Town. Salem Town tends to be a little more commercial, a little more mercantile, more successful. People out in Salem Village, they tend to be farmers, but it's New England, and farming, it sucks here. So not particularly successful farmers, more rural, more religious. So it's a little bit of a town and country kind of dynamic going on, even though Salem Town is not exactly a bustling metropolis like Boston or New York. It's a fairly modest settlement, but there does seem to be some town and country kind of tensions there. One of the groups that is really pushing for an independent Salem Village is a family called Putnams. Putnams were really fairly well off for a number of generations, but in more recent years, the Putnam fortunes have been kind of declining. Their power and their influence and their land ownership has been steadily dwindling. They're not happy about this, as you might understand. And they feel that a Salem Village becoming independent of Salem Town will be an important step. It will maybe help them. It's something that they are really focused on. One of the ways that you get your own independent Salem Village is to have your own meeting house. If you're living in Salem Village and you're a Puritan, and you are if you're living there, you've got to go a couple of miles into Salem Town to go to church twice a week for 3, 4, 5 hours. So if you want an independent Salem Village, you've got to get your own meeting house. So they set up a meeting house. They build a meeting house. They build a parsonage, and they bring in ministers. And they're given a kind of timeline. Salem Town says, if you can set this up and you can have a congregation last for a few years, we'll definitely think about independence. So they build a meeting house and they start bringing in ministers. The problem is they start going through ministers fairly quickly. This is not a glamorous posting. This is out in the boonies, a small congregation way out in the sticks. It's not really glamorous, so they have a hard time getting ministers. They have a hard time keeping ministers. So for a few years, ministers kind of come and go until a fellow named Reverend Samuel Parris takes the job out there in Salem Village. Now, Reverend Samuel Parris, this wasn't really his first choice. Parris had tried a few things down his life. He had been a merchant in Boston, didn't do very well there. He went down to Barbados to run a sugar plantation. You need sugar to make rum. So sugar, rum, molasses goes over to Africa for slaves, so it's part of the triangle trade, unfortunately. So he runs a sugar plantation in Barbados. That doesn't do very well. There's a storm that does a lot of damage. The bottom falls out of the sugar market. The plantation fails. He comes dragging back up to New England and applies for this job out in Salem Village, possibly out of some desperation. I think he feels sort of knocked around by fate. So he gets this job out in Salem Village. He drives a hard bargain, though. He wants money. He wants more money than they're willing to pay. He wants lifetime tenancy to the parsonage. So even after he retires, he still wants the house they put him up in. He wants more firewood than they initially bargained for. But eventually, they do come to an agreement, and Parris takes to the pulpit there in Salem Village. And he's actually pretty successful. Um, he doubles the congregation, the size of the congregation, in the first year, which I know nothing about how to gather a congregation, but my understanding is that if you take to the pulpit in a new assignment and you can double the attendance in a year, that's amazing. So he's actually doing really well. But then, as he's doing well and as things are kind of moving in the right direction for him, he starts getting a little more hard line, a little more fire and brimstone, I think, in his Puritan outlook. And this makes him less popular. Then people kind of start falling off. People find him less appealing, and his star rises, but then begins to kind of fall. So now he sees these people sort of drifting away, and he's getting nervous. Doesn't know really what's going on. Now, he lives there in the parsonage with his wife, with his daughter, Betty, and a niece they've taken in named Abigail. Betty, the daughter, she's probably 8 or 9. And Abigail, the niece, she's probably like 11 or so. It's a little hard to pin down the actual exact ages. Abigail had been living up in Maine, but there had been some Indian attacks where she was living, and she was sent down to Salem because it was viewed as a little safer place for her to live. And many experts looking at her behavior think that maybe Abigail was displaying some PTSD from the attacks that she survived up in Maine. Also living with the family are 2 slaves, a woman named Tituba and Tituba's husband, John Indian. Now, I had always grown up hearing that Tituba was from Barbados. And that it seems that Paris, when he was running that plantation down in Barbados, had acquired her, had bought her. And then when the plantation failed, he returns to New England, and he seems to have brought Tituba with him. So assume that she was a black woman from Barbados. More recent scholarship, though, indicates that probably not. In fact, for a long time, in the original records and into the 19th century, Tituba was referred to as an Indian. So she was probably one of the local American Indian tribes who was captured and enslaved. She may have been sent down to Barbados to work at that plantation when Paris took over. So she may have been a native New England sent down to Barbados and then brought back. So she starts out being known as an Indian, but in the 19th century, she becomes a Negro from the Caribbean, from Barbados. But the headline, the important thing to think about Tituba is that she's a slave. She's got no status. She's an Indian, possibly mixed blood, and she looks like nobody else in the village. So she sticks out in the crowd. The way the story is usually told is that Tituba is taking care of the 2 little girls, and she starts telling them scary stories. She shows them some voodoo. She's from Barbados, right? Shows them some voodoo tricks. They do some fortune telling, and the girls freak out. They run around the room. They bark like dogs. They hide under the table. One of the girls tries to climb up the chimney. One of them grabs the Bible, throws the Bible across the room. This is crazy, freaky behavior from these 2 little girls at a time when children, especially girls, should be seen and not heard. Paris has no idea what to do. He's uncertain what's going on. He can't find any earthly explanation. He calls in the local doctor, Dr. Griggs. Dr. Griggs is also out of his depth. Medicine in 1692, this is going to be basically medieval. So he has no idea what's going on. He kind of shrugs and says the girls are under an evil hand. There's something diabolical, something supernatural going on. I want to press pause for 1 sec, talk about Tituba in a little more detail, because I think she gets an incredibly bum rap in this whole story. The way the story usually goes is, like I said, she's telling them scary stories and showing them voodoo and whipping them up into a frenzy, and the girls freak out because she has egged them on. I think that her lowly status as a slave makes it really easy to just pin the whole thing on her. Hey, if a couple little white girls are acting up, must be something the black chick's doing to them, right? She must be whipping up into a frenzy with her crazy colored lady ways, right? So it makes it really easy to scapegoat her for the cause of all of this. Another thing to question is the story is that she's supposed to be showing them voodoo. But the stuff that we hear about them doing, which may be local legends that get added in, they're not exactly reliable. Stories that we hear about them, like breaking an egg into a glass of water, and you watch the way the yolk falls. You try to get a vision of the future, who you're going to marry, and whatnot. That's not voodoo. That's English folk magic. So the story is that Tituba is showing the girls forbidden stuff she's not supposed to be, but the stuff she's showing them is common English folklore. Maybe I think maybe Tituba's not showing the girls weird stuff. Maybe the girls are showing Tituba stuff they're not supposed to, and then they sort of blame her when it gets out of hand. But nonetheless, um, there's no rational explanation for what's going on. The girls then quickly cry out on several women in the village. They accuse several women in the village of being witches and using their magic witchy powers to attack them and to afflict them. This is how it begins. Now, there had been accusations of witchcraft before, but previously it had been stories like, well, there were one or two witches here or there. There was a lady down the road is weird, and I think she's a witch. Cotton Mather had investigated a case of an Irish woman who's supposed to have been a witch who attacked children in a family that she worked for. So you had accusations of witchcraft before, but it was always one or two people. Now these girls are crying out on several people in the village, saying that there are several witches, several handmaids of Satan active, and this is unheard of, and this is deeply freaky to the Puritans. There's not just one witch at large, there are several. Now, the accusations spread. They quickly cry out on several women. They accuse Tituba of being a witch. They also cry out on two other local women, a woman named Sarah Good and a woman named Sarah Osborne. And also Tituba. Tituba is pretty quick to cop to all of this. Now, I think it's a little tricky to try to get inside people's heads. But with Tituba, maybe you can profile her a little bit more accurately. As a slave, I bet she learns pretty quick to tell people what they want to hear. So when the owner, when Paris says to Tituba, tell me what's going on, I think she spins a good story and tells the guy what he wants to hear. You think there are witches and the devils out there? I'll tell you about witches and the devil, so long as you don't beat me. And there is indication that Paris may have been beating Tituba to elicit, to extract this confession. But Tituba tells this kind of wild story about going out to a meeting, so that they ride poles through the night, kind of like broomsticks, but they're poles. They ride poles through the night. They go out to an open field, and there are a number of witches there, and there's a tall black man from Boston, the devil himself. And Tituba sees the devil's book, and there are 9 different names in the book. She couldn't see what all of them were, but now they know there are 9 witches loose in Salem. So she says they go to this meeting, they eat red bread, they drink red wine, they listen to a sermon from the tall black man from Boston. This all sounds like a parody of an Episcopalian church service, but it may have been sort of what they were familiar with. They couldn't come up with anything too crazy because this is the only version of religion they had. They figure that Christianity is how it works. So what they come up with echoes sort of typical Christian service. But there are 9 witches out there, at least. Now, I mentioned that the charter gets revoked, and that's one of the sort of crazy-making factors in all of this. If you don't have a charter, your colony has no legal standing. So they feel that they've got no legal standing to actually hold trials. They can arrest people and wait, but they don't really feel they've got the legal standing to set up court to hear cases. They start arresting some of these people. The accusations start to spread. Now, you always hear this phrase, the afflicted girls. Betty and Abigail, they're in the beginning, they're very young, but this affliction starts to spread to other young girls in the area. But when you hear young girls, you're inclined to think, well, they're 10, 11, 12. But no, some of these girls are 18, 19, or 20 years old. So young women. And then some of them are even older. One of the afflicted girls is a woman in her 40s. There's Ann Putnam Sr. There's Ann Putnam Sr., there's Ann Putnam Jr. They both become afflicted. Ann Putnam is part of the Putnam family, the folks who feel that they're starting to kind of lose their status in town. So now this older woman has also joined the afflicted. She starts having the same sort of fits. People get brought up in front of to be questioned. Are you a witch? What familiar spirit do you have knowledge of? And they say, oh, I'm completely innocent. And if you play with your hair like that while they're talking to you, then the afflicted girls over in the corner, they all go, oh, just like you did. If you cough, they all cough because you're doing it to them. You're using your magic powers to afflict them like that. This is what witches do, according to Puritan belief at the time. That kind of stuff sounds nutty to us, but it is completely acceptable to them. This is what witches do. This is how it works. The accusations kind of spread. People start getting jailed on charges of witchcraft or accusations of witchcraft. And I think they're kind of starting to worry about, well, what do we do with all of these people? We don't have the authority to really try them, but we can lock them up and kind of wait. The local jail fills up. They actually start jailing accused witches as far away as Boston. Tituba gets sent into Boston to be locked up in Boston jail. There's a story I've heard, I don't know if it's accurate or not, that even buildings like chicken coops around Salem were being used to lock witches up to await trial. The accusations spread. Women and men are all accused. There have been a lot of attempts at explaining what happened, why this happened, and people like those sexy one-liner explanations. But for my money, one of the real drivers, one of the real factors in the witch trials is the Putnam family looking to get back at some of their enemies, including another family called the Porters. The Putnams and the Porters have a kind of Hatfield-McCoy feud going on. The Putnams, like I said, are kind of on their way down locally. The Porters have been kind of on their way up. The Putnams blame the Porters for a lot of their misfortune. They may or may not be entirely right about that. Frances Hill, an English historian who's done a lot of good work on the witch trials, she looked at the people doing the accusing and the people getting accused, and she tends to see it break down according to who was on what side of that family feud. The Putnams and the Putnam family allies tend to make accusations against Porters and Porter family allies. The Putnam family, like I said, was instrumental in getting Samuel Parris the job as the minister because it's part of their independence they want from Salem town. So the accusations spread, and then finally a new charter arrives from England. Now we've got legal authority. Thank God. So we can accuse people, but we can also finally start holding trials. Now, one of the people who gets accused pretty early on is a woman named Rebecca Nurse. Rebecca Nurse is a woman who lives out in Salem Village, and she lives on a prosperous farm with her family. And her maiden name is Towne, Towne. So Rebecca Towne, she marries into the Nurse family. The Nurses don't get along with the Putnams. She's accused of being a witch. Some of the afflicted girls say, particularly Ann Putnam Jr., say that Rebecca Nurse comes out at night and torments them. She sends her spectral shape, her ghost, out to attack them at night. So the sheriff goes out to arrest poor Rebecca Nurse. Rebecca Nurse is about 80 years old when this happens. She's sick in bed. She's been bedridden for a couple of days. She's old. She's not in great health. She's arrested as a witch. When the sheriff comes to arrest her on charges of witchcraft, she at one point says, "What sin unrepented of has God found in me? What have I done that I don't even know I've done that's led to this accusation?" So she gets tried as a witch. A special court, the court of Oyer and Terminer, gets set up here in town. Oyer means to hear, Terminer means to determine, to decide. Once the new charter arrives, you can set up a proper court. So they set up the court of Oyer and Terminer. They appoint several judges to sit on the court. Now, the Puritans are kind of down on the idea of legal training. They don't like lawyers. So none of the people who get accused have legal representation because they don't like lawyers. The judges who sit on the court of oyer intermiter are not men with legal training. They are all men who are prosperous, who are pillars of the community, who have other things to recommend them. So Judge John Hawthorne. We always hear about Judge Hawthorne. He's in the Crucible. He's Nathaniel Hawthorne's great-great-grandfather. People always know about him, even though he doesn't have as prominent a role as people think. He's a merchant. He's well off. He's a colonel in the local militia. All of these things make him a prominent, solid citizen. So we'll put him on the court to be a judge. No legal training, but he's a solid citizen. We'll put him on the court. His headstone is still in the Charter Street Cemetery, and his headstone calls him Colonel Hawthorne, not Judge Hawthorne. So, good enough. He's a solid citizen. The other guys who are on the court are also people who have, they're merchants. They're well off. They're not judges. So people are brought up in front of the court of oyer intermiter and accused of being witches. They have no legal counsel. They have no defense there to help them. And if you're brought up in the court brought in front of the court, it seems that guilt is just a foregone conclusion. One of the very Sarah Good, this sort of poor beggar woman who's dragged up in front of the court and accused of being a witch. I think the first question out of Judge Hawthorne's mouth to Sarah Good is, what evil spirit do you have familiarity with? Which is a hell of a leading question. And also the judges clearly are not impartial. The judges are acting as the prosecution. Now, if you're dragged up in front of the courts and accused of being a witch, you really have one chance and one chance only. You can confess that you are in fact a witch, and then kind of turn state's evidence in a way. So, you're right. I am a witch, and I'll help you find the other ones. I'm a witch, so she, so's he, definitely the guy over there, totally a witch. That is your only chance. If you maintain your innocence, as 19 people did, you'll be found guilty and you'll be sent out to Gallows Hill on the edge of town, which is actually Proctor's Ledge, to be hanged by the neck until dead. Being found guilty of witchcraft, this is a hanging offense. You don't burn witches here in Salem, you hang them. Your only chance is to confess to the crime of being a witch, which you aren't, because there were no witches in Salem in 1692. There were no witches in Salem until the 1970s. But throw yourself on the mercy of the court, confess, then help them try to find other witches. The accusations actually spread far beyond Salem. They spread throughout Essex County. They spread as far away as Andover. Andover, Massachusetts is a good half hour away today by car. And it would have been probably, a day or so by walking or by horseback back then. Andover has more accused witches than we do here in Salem. But you didn't hear it from me. Rich Hite, H-I-T-E. He's a friend of mine from Providence, and he wrote a book called In the Shadow of Salem. It's about the Andover witch hunt. So go to that if you're looking for more information on the Andover witch hunt. The accusations spread far beyond Salem. This circle of afflicted girls are rock star famous. They actually get brought into other communities to help them ferret out that they get sent over to Andover to help them find out the witches who are in other towns. This is crazy, right? Because this is a time when children should be seen and not heard. Just stay there and listen to your parents, listen to the minister, do what you're told. And now this circle of afflicted girls, Abigail Williams, Ann Putnam Jr., and the others, they're in charge now. Now people are listening to them, which had to have been frightfully intoxicating to young girls, to young people who had never been listened to. The accusations spread. Rebecca Nurse, she gets dragged up in front of the court, and the court is very surprised because Rebecca Nurse is a good Christian woman. She's known for her piety. She's viewed as a living saint. The jury initially finds her innocent. They're willing to let her go, but the magistrates kind of lean on the jury and say, "You need to reconsider this. You need to think about this very carefully." The jury reconsiders. They return a guilty verdict. Rebecca Nurse, in her 80s, gets dragged out to Proctor's Ledge on the edge of town, hanged by the neck until dead in her 80s. When you're hanged as a witch, you are not entitled to a Christian burial. Your body is left there, hanging from a tree branch, because they didn't seem to have built a gallows. They seem to be hanging people from a tree branch. And your body's left there. You're left out there for the coyotes, for the wolves, for the raccoons. We do not know where any of the bodies of the victims of 1692 are, because they're all left out there on the edge of town, hanging from a tree branch. There are stories about them cutting people down and throwing them into a ditch there on Proctor's Ledge. There's another story in Rebecca Nurse's family that the family came out later after dark, cut her body down, and secretly brought her home and gave her a decent burial on the family land. It's an oral tradition. We don't know that that's historically accurate, but it could very, very easily be. But yes, you're left out there hanging from a tree branch on Proctor's Ledge. I get a dry throat talking about this stuff. The Putnam family seems to continue settling some scores. One, and this is a story I find fascinating. One of the previous ministers who didn't work out in Salem Village is a fellow named George Burroughs. George Burroughs was living there in Salem Village. He takes the job as the minister. He lives with the Putnam family because the parsonage isn't finished yet. Doesn't get along with them though. There's some friction there between George Burroughs and Thomas Putnam. They don't get along. George Burroughs' wife dies when he's minister, and once he's taken the job, he also becomes kind of unpopular. They stop paying him, so when his wife dies, he can't actually pay for the funeral. He has to borrow money from Thomas Putnam to pay his wife's funeral expenses. Eventually, he doesn't work out. He quits. He leaves. He goes to Maine. A few years later, he returns to Salem. He's got some. He's come back to settle up accounts. Folks have the council has sort of freed up some money that they owe him. He's going to come back, get that money that he's owed. He can then pay off Thomas Putnam. Everything will be fine. He comes back into town to settle up. Thomas Putnam has him arrested for the debt. He's jailed. People take up a collection to pay the bail. There are certificates of good character presented to him for him, vouching for his good character. His bail is paid. He gets to pay off his debt to the Putnam family. He goes back to Maine, and it kind of makes the Putnams look like big fat jerks. The guys come here and you arrest him with his debt because his wife died, and you helped him pay the expenses. So I think that the Putnams are still nursing that annoyance, that sort of sting. So one of Ann Putnam Jr., the young daughter there in the Afflicted Girls, she starts to have visions that the wife who died comes back and says that George Burroughs had murdered her. And I think there's also something about George Burroughs, attacking the girls in their sleep. They swear out a warrant for his arrest. The sheriff goes up to Maine, brings George Burroughs back to Salem to be tried. This guy's a minister. So one of the explanations you always hear is that the people who get accused are the unpopular outsiders who are kind of on the edge of Salem, and that's not always true. Some of them were unpopular outsiders, others were ministers and good Christian women like Rebecca Nurse. So he's brought back into town, tried on charges of witchcraft, tried and convicted on this spectral evidence, as they call it. Cotton Mather is a minister from Boston. He has covered the story of the trial and execution of the washerwoman, the Irish washerwoman in Boston, who was executed as a witch. He's now an expert, so he's brought up here as a consultant to kind of help, oversee the witch trials. And he cautions against the use of this spectral evidence, this kind of magic testimony that, I saw Satan flying through the air, making out with my neighbor. To us, that sounds crazy. To Puritans back then, that is absolutely admissible as genuine evidence. He kind of says, you should probably be careful with this stuff. You probably shouldn't use this kind of weird, unprovable spectral evidence that people's ghosts are attacking other people. There's no real proof. We think that's probably true and could happen, but you should be careful about this. But no one listens to him on that. He's often made out to be this kind of fanatic who's driving people and whipping them into a frenzy. And he's not innocent of that by any means. But he does caution people that we really should be careful about this spectral evidence stuff. Nonetheless, George Burroughs is accused, tried, convicted, sentenced to hang. He is brought out to the edge of town. He is put on the scaffold on a ladder next to the tree. They put the noose over his neck. With moments left to live, George Burroughs takes a deep breath. He recites the Lord's Prayer. Our Father who art in heaven, that one. He recites this straight ahead. Letter perfect, not a single stumble. It was believed that a witch could not say the Lord's Prayer. Holy words would stick in a witch's throat if she or he tried to recite a prayer. He bats it off letter perfect with moments left to live. This kind of hush falls over the crowd. He shouldn't be able to do this. He might not be a witch. Everyone kind of looks over at Cotton Mather. This is one of the few executions Cotton Mather comes here to oversee. And Cotton Mather essentially shrugs and says, apparently we were wrong. I guess a witch can say the Lord's Prayer after all. And Reverend George Burroughs is hanged by the neck until dead there on the edge of town. If they want you, they're going to get you. Your guilt is a foregone conclusion. The accusation will be bolstered with this wacky spectral evidence that they are cautious about using, but not cautious enough. Now, Rebecca Nurse has a couple of sisters, the Town sisters. The Town family was allied with the Porters, the family the Putnams don't like. So the Putnams also start making accusations against the two other sisters, Sarah Cloyce and Mary Easty or Esty. I'm not sure which. They both get arrested on charges of witchcraft. The Putnams are kind of going after the whole family. It seems they're out for blood. So, like I said, the accusations spread and spread. Then one of the other sort of stories that everyone always knows is the story of Giles Corey. The story of Giles Corey is that he's an old farmer. He's in his 80s. He's on his third wife. She gets accused of being a witch. He gets accused of being a witch. He testifies against her, which makes me not think he's a terribly nice guy. I did hear somebody talking about what a hero Giles Corey was. I don't think this guy was a hero at all. He was unpopular. He had beaten a man to death a few years before. Now he's crying out on his own wife for being a witch. He's dragged up in front of the court and has to enter a plea. Giles Corey, you innocent or guilty? He says, not guilty. Then there's this other kind of pro forma thing that you've got to do. You've got to enter a plea and you have to acknowledge the court's authority. Are you innocent or guilty? I'm innocent. And how will you be tried is the question. And the response is supposed to be, I'll be tried by God and my country. My God, my king, I think. But he won't say that last part. And how will you be tried? He stands mute. He says nothing until he enters a plea, until he acknowledges the court's authority, until he admits submits himself to the authority of the court. He can't be tried. There's a strategy on his part to get out of this. He stands mute. So then to compel him to acknowledge the court's authority, to submit himself to the court, the sheriff, George Corwin, invokes this quaint old English custom. They bring Giles Corey out into a field. They lay him down. They put a board on his chest. They start to pile rocks on top of the board. This is meant to compel him to submit to the court's authority. They throw some rocks in the board. Are you innocent or guilty? He says nothing. They throw some more rocks in the board. Are you innocent or guilty? He says nothing. This goes on for 2 agonizing days. Giles Corey, as I said, is about 80 or over 80 years old when this happens. The only thing he does say, according to legend, is at one point he says, "More weight," which kind of makes me like him. Um, Eventually, he can't say anything. He can't submit to the court's authority. He can't say anything. His tongue has turned purple. It's being forced out of his mouth due to the weight of the rocks on his chest. Sheriff George Corn walks over, uses the tip of his walking stick to press Giles Corey's tongue back into his mouth and demand a plea. Are you innocent or guilty? After about 2 days, it's too much. He is crushed under the weight of the rocks that have been piled on his chest for over 2 days. So he's never tried, he's never convicted, he's never hanged, but he does lose his life in that process. And like I said, I heard somebody a while back talking about how he was an American hero who stuck it to the system, but really he testified against his own wife. He beat a man to death a few years before. He was not at all heroic. He seems like a miserable old character. The accusations spread. People are getting hanged throughout the summer of 1692. Once a month, there are executions. And before it's all over, 19 men and women will be hanged. It's predominantly women, but a number of men. There are 14 women and 5 men are hanged out there on the edge of town at Proctor's Ledge. The accusations spread. They kind of start to work their way up the food chain. Eventually, the wife of the governor of Massachusetts is accused of being a witch. At that point, the governor steps in and says, "No, game over. We're done." The governor abolishes the court of oyer intermiter. He sets up a new court. The new court is not allowed to consider spectral evidence. With spectral evidence off the table, one charge after another collapses. There is no good evidence to support any of these charges. None of these people were practicing witchcraft. With no good evidence to support these charges, they start to collapse. One charge after another starts to collapse. Up to 20 accused witches are cleared in one day by the new court. One of the other turning points in the witch trials is that Mary Eastie, Rebecca Nurse's sister, she's arrested, she's sent to jail, and she has this really moving letter that she submits. And if you were lucky enough to get over to the Peabody Essex Museum, they had an exhibit of documents related to the witch trials, and one of them was Mary Eastie's letter. And I know it's going to sound silly, but I've always mentioned it on tours, and seeing it in person just inches away was really kind of creepy and rather moving. You can find the text of it online, but it's this plea to rethink what you're doing. It's not for her. It's for everyone else. And that to me is what makes it so moving. There's a line in there that says something about, I know that my time is set and I must die. But if your honors continue in this way, you will be guilty of innocent blood. So she's urging them. I know I'm going to die. I know I'm done. My time is set. But think about what you're doing and think about the innocent people that you're going to kill if you continue like this. Incredibly moving. Find the text online. I'll post a link for it down below when I get a moment. So the government also steps in, abolishes the court of oyer intermiter, sets up a new court. New court cannot consider special evidence, and now the jails begin to clear out. Up to 20 witches are cleared in one day by the new court. One of the other factors is that because the witch trials are spreading far beyond Salem, people from kind of outside the bubble are seeing what's going on in Salem, and public opinion starts to kind of turn against the witch trials. There are some letters and some small booklets that are published, pamphlets, criticizing the witch trials and what's going on in Salem. And I think after a insane year, people start to kind of wake up to what the hell they've been caught up in this whole time. The whole episode really lasts summer. Basically a year. The executions happen mostly over the summer. But people start to kind of wake up to what happened. Once it's over, things try to go back to normal. This sort of period of forgetting sets in. People kind of don't want to deal with this. They try to go back to something like normal. The jails clear out, but not entirely. There's some people who are still stuck. When you are locked up on charges of witchcraft, you are charged rent for your cell. You're charged for your food, whatever food they give you. Some people are also charged for the shackles they use to pin you to the wall. So while you're there in jail awaiting trial or awaiting execution, the meter's running. So once the witch trials are over, sometimes you can't leave because you still owe the jailer money. You've been locked up all summer. You're going to meet your God at the end of a rope because you've been found guilty. Now you're cleared of all charges, but some people have to stay in jail because they still owe money to the jailer. It's a horrific situation to make things even worse. Now that happens with Tituba. She's a slave. She's got no money of her own. She's in Boston. Samuel Paris, her owner, leaves her there. He's got no interest in bailing her out. He leaves her there. Tituba is bailed out a little while later by someone. We don't know who. Somebody pays off her jail fees, takes her with him. And Tituba vanishes back into the mists of history. We lose track of Tituba after she walks out of Boston jail, whoever it was who bailed her out. Ann Putnam Jr., a few years later, submits a written statement to the minister, the new minister of Salem Village. Samuel Paris has moved out of town. She submits an apology, a letter to the minister to be read to the congregation. She stands there while the minister reads this out. The new minister reads this out to the group, and it's also it's not as moving as Mary Eastie's letter at all. She's kind of trying to apologize, but she's also kind of trying not to. She says that she desires to lie in the dust and be forgotten. She's ashamed of what happened, but it was a great delusion of Satan. Satan had so messed with her mind and made her think that this was true, and Satan had been using her. So she's kind of saying, I'm sorry it happened, but really it was the devil that made this happen. She dies in her 30s, single. Nobody wants to marry her, which is perhaps unsurprising. One of the other stories is Abigail Williams, Paris's niece, one of the afflicted girl, one of the original afflicted girls. She disappears after the trials are over. One of the stories which Arthur Miller mentions in his preface to The Crucible is he heard, and he doesn't say where he heard this, and I don't think anybody else has a line on this. I think it's only a claim that appears there in Arthur Miller's introduction. He says that he had heard that Abigail Williams ends up hooking in Boston and then disappears. I think that's just sort of moralistic and probably misogynistic to think, well, she must have ended up as a hooker in Boston. She was such a terrible person. So I think that's just a story. Miller really gives us no reference for that, no backup to where he got that story. A lot of people know the story from The Crucible. One of the things that I have to do all the freaking time is clear up misconceptions that people come to Salem with. Everyone kind of feels they know the story. So talking about what happened is important, but also talking about what didn't happen I think is also important, and trying to kind of clear up some of the misconceptions that people come to. So after doing tours here in Salem for a number of years, by the end of the first year, you've kind of heard them all. Just a few of them. The first really big, easy one is these people were not witches. There were no Wiccans here. There were no people practicing witchcraft. One of the ideas that you hear bandied about is that witchcraft is a pagan survival from prehistory. Margaret Murray writes a book called The Witch Cult in Western Europe, where she talks about this pre-Christian religion from the dawn of time, which has been driven underground and is practiced in secret. And perhaps what we think of as witches are these practitioners of an ancient religion. So maybe these people here in Salem who are supposed to be witches, maybe they were practicing this ancient religion. No, they weren't. Everyone here in Salem, they are intensely devout Puritans on some level. And they weren't Wiccans. All of these people were good Christians who were horrified, I'm sure, to be accused of not being good Christians. So no Wiccans, for better or for worse. Nobody was burned. This is a hanging offense. So I occasionally, I cringe whenever I hear people say, well, the witches who were burned at Salem, because nobody was burned here. They were all hanged. That's the punishment that gets meted out for accused witches. There's an attempt at profiling people and kind of coming up with, well, this is the type of person who got accused. It was all misfits and outsiders and people who were unpopular on the edge of the community. There were some of those. Sarah Good's a beggar, but there were also people who were much more highly placed. Rebecca Nurse, like I said, George Burroughs, a minister. So it's not just misfits and outsiders and weirdos. It's pillars of the community, people who were known to all and sundry. So it's not just outsiders and weirdos. One of the other possible explanations that gets thrown around is that it's midwives and herbalists, and it's women who know about stuff that they're not supposed to know. Again, that doesn't seem to be the case. One of the handy, dare I say, things about the witch trials is that none of these folks are really unknowns. We have scraps of information about all of them, so we know a bit about each of these people. And none of them have the reputation for being herbalists or midwives. Midwives are involved in the witch trials because one of the jobs midwives are drafted into is looking for witch marks on people. If you're accused of being a witch, the idea is that you'll have a familiar and that the devil will have given you to be your freaky magic pet. And that you will feed the familiar from some witch's teat somewhere on your body. So the judges will have midwives examine people and find some weird little irregularity, and that will be enough. That will be the witch mark that condemns you. I don't know about any of you folks. I have a mole on my stomach right up to Gallows Hill for me. That would have been enough to get me condemned, I'm sure, because that would have been the witch's mark. So they do actually have midwives looking for these witch marks. There is one story. It's an 18 plus crowd, right? There's one story about midwives searching one of the, or people. I'm not clear if it's entirely clear if it's the midwives, but there are some people searching one of the women for a witch mark, and they say that they find a lump or an excrescence of some kind, and I think they say it's down below the navel in the hairy parts. And they find this bump, and it seems to be very sensitive. And she doesn't, oh, don't touch there. Clearly, this is the devil's mark. This is clearly the suspicious lump. Apparently, they can't then find it again later. Typical, right, ladies? So midwives are kind of drafted in to help examine people. One of the preconceived notions that I hear about all the time is that it was only women who were accused, and it was the women who spoke out against the church, the women who had power and money and independence, and the Puritan patriarchy had to get rid of them. And again, that doesn't really seem to wash. There's probably a couple who you could say fit that profile, but by and large, no. Herbalists and midwives, no. People like to say that, well, it's the women who had this sort of forbidden secret knowledge. Herbalists, midwives, the women who knew stuff, knew witchy stuff, the stuff that we think of as witchy stuff, and they must have they were accused. Again, none of them were herbalists. The midwives get brought in for searches. As far as the women who spoke out against the church, that doesn't seem to have happened. When you're a Puritan, these are intensely religious people. The idea of speaking out against the church's authority is almost unthinkable. People did speak out against the witch trials. People thought this was crazy. We're not witches. Stop doing this. But the idea of speaking against, pushing back against the church's authority seems to be utterly alien to the 17th century Puritan mindset. So you really need to kind of look at this sort of case by case as to why people get accused. One thing, the theory that will not die, the theory I hear all the frickin' time. on tours is was all ergot poisoning, right? That's the whole explanation. That's what happened. In case you don't know about the ergot theory, the zombie theory that will not die, uh, ergot is a mold that grows on grain. It apparently has hallucinogenic properties. The theory goes that the grain that people are growing to make bread gets wet, it gets moldy. They then take the grain home, they use it to bake bread. People eat the bread, which is infected with this ergot, the enzymes from the ergot. People get high. It's like being on LSD, and that's why people see Satan flying through the air, making out with their neighbor. It's a great explanation. It's really cool. It's a nice, sexy one-liner, high concept kind of explanation. Debunked and discarded almost immediately. No historians take this idea seriously at all. But it makes for great TV. So documentaries always mention ergot poisoning. And it seems that this is not at all the case. One of the ways we kind of know about this is that when you are ingesting enough ergot to start having these hallucinations, you have other symptoms, things like gangrene, like your fingers turn black and fall off. Nobody mentions that happening, and they sure as hell would have if it did. So ergot poisoning was discarded almost immediately. There is a great historian named Margot Burns, and Margot's done a really good talk. I think it's called "What a Long Strange Trip It's Been," and you can find that on YouTube. If Margot comes to your organization to talk about that, absolutely book that talk. Margot's delightful, and has forgotten more about the witch trials than I'm ever going to know. So Margot's a great source for more information about the zombie theory that will not fucking die. This, I hope, gives you a sense of what did and what didn't happen in that really awful year of 1692. I'm sure I have forgotten to mention stuff. I'm sure I've glossed over stuff that you're curious about. If you have other questions, you can pop questions in the comment box. You can follow up with me afterwards. I will try to answer any questions that come in if I can. If I can't answer them off the top of my head, I will research them and get back to you. I don't see any real questions, which is good because I don't have to come up with answers. Thank you all for coming out. I'll do some more of these talks. If you want to get in touch with me here on Facebook, please don't hesitate to. You can always go over to my website, which is Rory O'Brien Books. That's where you can buy books like Gallows Hill or The Afflicted Girl. I've been talking about Afflicted Girls all evening. That's where the title comes from. So these are murder mysteries. I have more of those on the way. If you pop down into the description of this event, you'll find ways you could maybe slip me a couple of bucks if you feel like it. If you don't, that's totally fine. If you feel like slipping a few bucks into the digital hat, there's a Venmo and a coffee app and a PayPal, and all any money that you do care to send along. Like I said, I promise I will spend it foolishly. So thank you all for coming out. I hope you've had as much fun doing this as I have. I hope you learned something. And follow up with me with any questions. This has been totally fun. I'm Rory Raven, also going by Rory O'Brien on some occasions, and I hope to catch up with you all very soon in person once all of this is over. So, good night, wash your hands, wear your mask, and I can't wait to see all of you in person very, very soon. So, good night.